You there, guardsman! Do you like multi-part plastic sci-fi infantry that doesn't cost a kidney? Well, good news! The Mordian Glory channel is now officially sponsored by Wargames Atlantic. Wargames Atlantic sells fantastic sci-fi models which are perfect as alternative Imperial Guardsmen. This includes the Bulldogs, totally not Praetorians, or the Legrognards, which are totally not Mordians, Vestorians, or Kriegers, all in one box. And the best bit is, Wargames Atlantic offers a bulk buy discount, and the more you buy, the bigger the discount. Perfect for amassing those huge platoons of guardsmen. So what are you waiting, you fool? Click on the affiliate link down below, get yourself some great models, and support the channel today.
Hello again, my little conscripts, and welcome to another Mordian Glory video. In today's episode, we shall be casting our ever-critical eye over another 10th edition Imperial Guard datasheet. And this time we have in our sights the Avenger Strike Fighter, which is pretty much the A-10 Warthog of Warhammer 40k. And yes, that is as awesome as it sounds. Like the A-10 Warthog, the Avenger Strike Fighter is a beautiful model that looks awesome on the tabletop. But speaking of tabletop, how does this thing perform in-game now that we've got a full codex supporting it rather than just the old guard index? Well, there's only one way to find out. Let's mount up and fly right into this thing. As is tradition, let's begin with a cheeky gander at the Avenger Strike Fighter's stat line. First off, we have a movement of 20 plus inches. Now, if you're not familiar with how the aircraft rules of 40k 10th edition work, that might look a little bit strange because normally your movement tells you your maximum movement, but this is showing you your minimum movement. So you have to move a minimum of 20 inches with your Avenger Strike Fighter. Your maximum is unlimited. So you can go as far as you want within the confines of the board. And I do believe there are actually rules for going on and off the board with your Avenger Strike Fighter and with other flyers as well. Now, a 20-inch move is a bit of a double-edged sword, or should I say a 20-plus inch move is a bit of a double-edged sword. Because on the one hand, obviously, that's a minimum of 20 inches. 40k boards are already quite tight. You can't land your model on any enemy models, even though it's flying up in the sky. You can't have your base land on any models. So it can be sometimes a little tricky moving this thing around. But I like to look at things in a positive way. I like to look at the Avenger Strike Fighter, not for the minimum movement and how tricky that can be, but the flexibility that maximum movement gives you. You should think about the Avenger Strike Fighter not as a direct damage dealing vehicle, similar to a Leman Russ or a Rogel Dawn. Instead, you should be thinking about this thing like it's an indirect fire vehicle. Because think about it, it can go anywhere it wants, it can go over terrain, all that good stuff, and as long as you can place it, it can start shooting stuff. So you could fly past all of those L-shaped ruins. Find a gap that the opponent has left, drop your thing down and start shooting units that are trying to hide. When you start thinking about the Avenger Strike Fighter like that, you start to realize that this unit actually does have some potential. But we'll come back to that little thought at the end of the video when we're talking about tactics and how you can leverage this unit with the new codex. For now, let's focus on the rest of its stat line. The Avenger Strike Fighter is a reasonably durable vehicle. On the one hand, toughness 9 is a little light. It does mean that things like melter guns are going to be wounding you on 4s, which opens you up to a whole new world of pain because there are quite a lot of melter and melter equivalent weapons out there. But then you've got a 3-up save. I wouldn't have been surprised if they'd gone for like a 4-up save on a light vehicle like this, so I'm pretty happy with that 3-up save. And then we've got 14 wounds, which is pretty chunky. It's a pretty chunky stat line in terms of the wound pool that it's got. So T9, 3+ save, 14 wounds. If you think about it as like a flying chimera that gets 3 additional wounds, and that starts putting it into perspective, because anyone who's used a chimera on the tabletop will tell you that no, they're not the most durable thing, but they always take that little bit more firepower than your opponent was expecting to kill them. So now you've got something that does that, but just a little bit better. And so it is a reasonably durable vehicle. Rounding out the stat line, we have a leadership of 7+. But this is really a non-issue for the Avenger Strike Fighter because it hasn't got any objective control anyway because it's a flyer, it's up in the air, it can't hold objectives. And it doesn't have the squadron keyword, so it doesn't matter because you can't give it orders. So if it gets battle shocked, it doesn't mean anything there. The only thing it really matters for is there are a handful of stratagems that can work on the Avenger Strike Fighter. So there's two ways of looking at it. It's glass half full, glass half empty. Glass half full being, I don't care about Leadership 7 or Battle Shock on this thing at all. Glass half empty being, of course, oh god, I wish I could get orders on this thing. It's missing the squadron keyword. But that just about covers the stat line. Now let's move on to the weapons and war gear. Each Avenger Strike Fighter comes with an Avenger bolt cannon, a heavy stubber, and 2 las cannons. The las cannons are pretty standard issue. 48-inch range, 1 shot each, ballistic skill 4+, strength 12, AP -3, D6 +1 damage. So because you've got 2 of these las cannons, you'll get 2 of these shots. I love las cannons. I think they're a great weapon, solid weapon, and I tend to find you can never have too many in an army. Whenever I run a Lehman Russ, the whole weapon's going to be a las cannon. Whenever I run a Sentinel, it's going to be a las cannon. If I could strap las cannons to Chimeras, to Hellhounds, to Rogal Dawns, one of the things I wish the Rogal Dawn had was a las cannon on the front. I would take a las cannon on a Rogal Dawn over the pulverizer cannon or the Gatling cannon. So las cannons are just great. The more you have, the better. Because in this world where either you seem to face knights left, right, and center, and you need more anti-tank when dealing with those guys, or you're facing elite infantry, whether it's custodians or some kind of mad Death Guard Terminator, the more big strength, big AP, big damage weapons you have, the better. We are really in an era of go big or go home when it comes to any weapon choices. So coming with 2 las cannons here is great. It means that the Avenger Strike Fighter has got a bit of sting in its tail, and it can punch up into some pretty heavy vehicles if it needs to. As for the heavy stubber, that's just a bit of fun. Can't go wrong with a bit of heavy stubberage. It's just 3 shots at strength 4, AP 0, damage 1, but it is rapid fire 3, so if you get within 18 inches, which you should be able to with your minimum of a 20-inch plus move, you'll be getting 6 shots from this thing. The main star of the show, and the thing that the vehicle is named after, is the Avenger bolt cannon. So this has sustained hits 1. So for every 6 that you roll, you get an additional hit. It's got a 36-inch range, which is pretty decent. And it fires a very respectable 10 shots, which means on average, you should be getting 1 to 2 additional hits for this thing, thanks to sustained hits 1. But it could spike a lot more than that. It only has a ballistic skill of 4+, but it is at strength 6, AP -1, damage 2. Now, that is actually the perfect profile for what we want the Avenger to go after. Because the las cannons are nice, they add a bit of sting, but what we want the Avenger to go after is shit munchers. One of the things that I have noticed in playing competitive 40k, not just recently, but for a little while now, is that everyone seems to take the big Death Star units and they put loads of points and tactics and stratagems into building these big slammers. But they then rely upon shit munchers, small squads. Maybe they're Sisters of Silence for Custodies, maybe they're Scouts or Intercessors for Space Marines, maybe it's Zangors or Thousand Suns or Poxwalkers for things like Death Guard, and even Imperial Knights might bring things like Voidsmen at Arms. I saw that recently in a very good tournament list. These shit munchers do a very important role because they efficiently will hold objectives whilst all the big stuff can go forward and start punching you. But if you can kill those shit munchers, then the enemy has to start thinking about, well, do I move a viable unit back to hold an objective? I once recently caused a Death Guard player to put a 250 point unit of Death Shroud Terminator just holding his natural objective because I killed the Poxwalkers that were there. So it forced him to have to put something more viable there, otherwise he wasn't going to get those primary points. So everyone relies on these guys for holding primary points efficiently. They rely on them for doing actions efficiently. But once you take those ship munchers away, then they start having to use much more viable units. And this is where I think the Avenger Strike Fighter and the Avenger Bolt Cannon can really shine. Because if you've got like a little 4-5 man squad, something that's like teeth, toughness 3, 1 wound each, the Strike Fighter can hoover that up. It's going to get between 6 and 7 hits with its Avenger Bolt Cannon. Probably going to wound on 2s because a lot of these things are toughness 3. AP -1, damage 2. It should be able to, between the Avenger Bolt Cannon and the 6 shots of the Heavy Stubber and a couple of cheeky las cannon shots, should be able to pick up a 4-man Sisters of Silence unit, 5-man Scout Squad, something like that. It should be able to do it. So the Avenger Strike Fighter, the Avenger Bolt Cannon for it, it's very good at what we want this thing to do. Now, I will admit, I've kind of got a little bit of ahead of myself there. I was going to save that for the tactics bit, so sorry for muddying the waters. But you know what? Let's look at the abilities now, and then we can look at what codex and detachment stuff can help support the Avenger in its role as the Ship Muncher Hunter. I'm not going to lie to you, I'm not overly impressed by the ability of the Avenger Strike Fighter. Firstly, it's missing hover, which is a big problem. Really does kind of limit it. It'd be nice to have this thing as a flyer, but also as like a hover jet thing for a bit more fire support. Play it a bit more conservatively, but it is what it is. And then you've got Fiery Vengeance. Once per turn in your opponent's shooting phase, when another friendly Ash Minotaur unit within 6 inches of this model is destroyed by an attack made by a unit that can fly, one model from your army with this ability can use it. If it does, after the attacking is finished making its attacks, that model can shoot as if it were your shooting phase. When resolving those attacks, it can only target that enemy unit. It's just a bag of shit. So basically, if you have one of your units that's killed by an enemy fly unit, your Avenger Strike Fighter can shoot them back. There's just too many qualifiers here. A, you've got to be within 6 inches of the Strike Fighter. And it is a reasonably large model, but it's still fairly close. It's still pretty close. And then the enemy unit has to have fly. And then they have to be an eligible target. Yeah. No. No, it's a rubbish ability, and it's something to keep at the back of your mind, but I don't think it's one you want to be building your strategy around. And if we're using the Avenger Strike Fighter in its role as zooming, getting past terrain, shooting units that are trying to hide, you're probably not going to be near any friendly models anyway to trigger this ability. But now let's talk about what support we can throw behind the Avenger Strike Fighter to get the most out of it. Between the Index and the Codex, I would say the Avenger Strike Fighter has had a side grade. Previously in the Index, it could receive orders and it could receive support from the Officer of the Fleet, from the Regimental Advisors. Neither of those things are true anymore. So your Avenger Strike Fighter will be hitting on 4s. However, in the Index, there was basically no stratagem support for the Avenger Strike Fighter, where now we do have a few interesting tools available to us. Speaking of the core rulebook, though, you are definitely going to want to keep 1 command point back for rapid ingress. Because of the way aircraft rules work, if you just bring this thing on from Strategic Reserve, the first turn that you do that, let's say turn 2, it just sits there, doing nothing. Just because it can't fit on the board within 6 inches, so it just has to be placed on, but then it's not allowed to do anything. That's kind of one of these weird things that happens with Strategic Reserves that a lot of people aren't aware of. So what you do is you put it in reserve, and then you hope that you go second, because then when your opponent enters their turn 2, you can go rapid ingress, bring this thing in, and then from your turn 2 onwards, it's zooming around, having a great time. But what about stratagems in the Codex? Well, there isn't a lot that can help you here. You've got Combined Arms, and technically Stalwart Protector does work because you target 1 Ash Minotaur vehicle unit. I'm not sure how helpful it's going to be, but you might be able to get the Strike Fighter to give cover to the infantry on the ground. It's definitely not rules as intended, but it is rules as written. Speaking of technically also works, you can use the Hammer of the Emperor crash through stratagem on your Avenger Strike Fighter as well, but it is completely and utterly useless because the Avenger Strike Fighter can just fly over all the buildings anyway. But you can use ablative plating on the Avenger Strike Fighter. It's 2 CP. It might not be worth it, but you could use it, and with that 14 wound pool it has, maybe it'd actually not be a bad idea. You could also go over to the Siege Regiment, and whilst there's no stratagems that help you here, you could potentially take advantage of the Incendiary Bombardment. So if we want to get round the whole fact that the Avenger Bolt Cannon is only AP -1, maybe the Incendiary Bombardment would help us there. Of course, you still have to be 12 inches away with the Avenger Strike Fighter for this to work, so maybe it's not great. But you can absolutely put smoke shells on the Avenger Strike Fighter, and that will make it -1 to hit. It will give it stealth. That's quite a good way of recreating the old aircraft rules, because in previous editions, aircraft were naturally -1 to hit. Now they don't have that, but via smoke shells, you could bring that back. So I think smoke shells and the siege attachment are probably one of the better ways of putting some support behind the Avenger Strike Fighter in the Codex. However, we also have outside the Codex. Okay, I'm not going to lie, this is absolutely a meme. Bridgehead Strike. The detachment has fallen on hard times, and the Avenger Strike Fighter is not going to dig it out of those hard times. Technically, you can use fire and relocate on the Avenger Strike Fighter, but you're never going to, because it allows you to advance and shoot. But the Avenger Strike Fighter can just go an infinite number of inches that it needs to, so it doesn't need to advance and shoot. But technically it works. If I'm going to be absolutely honest with you, I think the best way of running the Avenger Strike Fighter is probably inside the aforementioned Siege Regiment. A lot of the other stratagems that we've looked at just don't add enough to it. But smoke shells, I really do think, are a very valuable thing for the Avenger Strike Fighter to have. Because it's going to need to be able to take a punch back, considering that we're going to be flying it forward and going after those hidden enemy units. If you want to know what the Avenger Strike Fighter's biggest advantage it has, it's its points cost. It's only 130 points. And that is actually very reasonable for the amount of firepower that you're getting. You're getting 2 las cannons and a stubber and the Avenger Bolt Cannon. And when we compare it to a lot of our other indirect fire options, you realize that the Avenger Strike Fighter is actually pretty affordable in comparison to them. For example, if we look at the Basilisk, that's 140 points. Now remember, the Basilisk has lost the heavy keyword, so it needs an order in order for it to hit on 4s. So it's 140 points plus either a command point and Acadian Castellan for flexible command if you're in combined arms, or it needs a tank commander or the Lord Solar to boss it around. So it's actually much more expensive than 140 points. The Manticore's fallen on hard times. What's that, like 100? Let's actually find the Manticore. It's something ridiculous, isn't it? 165. Jesus Christ. That's just out of the fucking question. You've got the artillery team and the field ordnance battery, which are both technically cheaper than the Avenger Strike Fighter, but the field ordnance battery is 110 points, but it needs an officer to boss it around. If you take 2 of them and use a Castellan, you're still looking at an average of about 140 points, roughly 140, 135 points for the field ordnance battery, which arguably doesn't have as good firepower as the Avenger Strike Fighter, because the field ordnance battery rolls an average of 7 shots plus blast. Okay, so 9. But that's not the 10 plus sustained hits of the Avenger Strike Fighter. And they don't have the las cannons on top of that as well. Look at the artillery team. Okay, the artillery team is probably our best artillery piece right now. 95 points. You take 2 of those, plus a Castellan, you're looking at about 250 points. Well, that is only the same price as essentially 2 Avenger Strike Fighters. And in my mind, I don't think you take 2 Avenger Strike Fighters. I think you look at this through the lens of taking a single strike fighter. Instead of something like a Basilisk, instead of something like a Field Horse Battery or something, you just take a single strike fighter. It's an alternative indirect fire option that doesn't have any hidden costs and can just hit on 4s off its own back. It doesn't have a lot of the other advantages that indirect fire units have, like being able to sit back out of line of sight and all that kind of good stuff. Of course. But if I was to sum up everything to do with the Avenger Strike Fighter, it's a cool model. And it's not as bad as everyone thinks it is. Would you take one to a tournament and expect to win and go top table with it? No. Could you include one in your list, have a bit of fun, and feel like you weren't tying one arm behind your back? Absolutely. And hell, you might even get a few point savings out of it as well. But of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section below. I definitely have a soft spot for the Avenger Strike Fighter, and I really, really want this thing to be good. But let me know what you guys think. Am I wishful thinking here? Am I hoping against hope? Is the Avenger Strike Fighter usable, or is it going to have to become a hanger queen? If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to go ahead and smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode.
Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian glory hole, today is your lucky day.